It's a Politics Wednesday edition of River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer on this, the day after the 2026 Iowa primaries. And joining us with their analysis, Donna Hoffman with me in the Cedar Falls studio, the Chuck and Barbara Grassley Professor of Political Science at the University of Northern Iowa here. Hi, Donna.
Good afternoon, Ben.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to Kelly Shaw in our Ames studio, teaching professor of political science at ISU, also co-director of their Center for Cyclone Civics. Also, worth mentioning, former two-term mayor of Indianola. That experience often coming in handy with your analysis there, Kelly. Thank you so much for stepping into our studio for this.
My pleasure, Ben. Thanks for having me today.
Well, Iowa voted yesterday. The results more surprising than many predicted. Just a quick flyover of the things we'll dig into this hour. The biggest story, Zach Lane, 40-year-old farmer, businessman from Belle Plaine, no electoral experience, defeating the Trump-endorsed Congressman Randy Feenstra for the Republican gubernatorial nomination. On the Senate side, the matchup's now set. Ashley Hinson, three-term Congresswoman, Trump's preferred candidate in that, easily defeating former State Senator Jim Carlin. She'll face Democrat Josh Turek in November, the four-time Paralympic gold medalist who beat State Senator Zach Walz in the Democratic primary. And in other congressional races, we'll get to those as well, but those are our headlines for now. We want to hear from you this hour, River to River listeners. Iowa voters went to the polls yesterday. Some of you were among them. We want to know, what race were you watching most last night? Were you surprised by the result? What made you choose the candidate that you did? Perhaps you were part of that Republican primary as a voter. 1-866-780-9100, River to River at iowapublicradio.org. And we want to hear, let's start with that headline. I want to pull up some audio here that we have. Businessman Zach Lane, first-time candidate, narrowly pulling off that upset over the presumed frontrunner Randy Feenstra. Here he is after that victory.
I don't have to tell you this, but nobody thought this could be done. We were outspent, opposed by the establishment, told to wait our turn. Well, tonight the people of Iowa had something to say about that we're not going to wait anymore. They said Iowa doesn't belong to the political class. They said our state does not belong to the lobbyists, special interests, and corporate giants who for far too long have had way too much power in our state. Instead, you all said this belongs to the people.
Now, fundraising reports show Lane raised the most among Republican gubernatorial candidates between January 1st through May the 14th, outpacing Feenstra, the previous top owner. Randy Feenstra conceding last night. Let's listen to that.
I just called Zach Lane, said, hey, you got to carry this torch. We got to keep this state red. You got to make sure you beat Rob Sand. I'm all in to help him out. We are going to make sure that we have him as the next governor.
Okay, Trump endorsed Feenstra 4 days before the primary that Lane won. Donna, does last night tell us something about the real limits of Trump's endorsement, or is this a Randy Feenstra specific story?
Well, obviously endorsements are usually kind of limited. Trump has been unusual in the sense that his endorsement has carried more weight than oftentimes we see. But unlike in Texas earlier, right, in their primary, Trump came in and endorsed Paxton. Paxton was already kind of surging in that. Here, he came in late for a different reason, I think, for a flagging campaign. Feenstra, as you noted, was being outspent by Zach Lane in that last quarter. And it was a little bit too little too late, I think, in this regard, because Feenstra had to move really quickly if he was going to capitalize on that Trump endorsement. He did get an ad or two up, and at least one ad up. But, over a weekend, maybe not a lot of people paying attention. It was too little too late, I think, Trump endorsement of Feenstra. And Lane came on really strong there at the end. Steen, I think one of the surprises for me in that race was that Steen really faded. Pretty evidently in the results as well. And so lots of movement in that race in the last several months.
Kelly, are you as surprised as most analysts and people are that Zach Lane pulled out a win here?
Surprised might be too strong of a word, Ben. I think when we look at the lay of the land and how Lane had made progress, certainly since the first of the year and in terms of fundraising and whatnot, we knew he was coming, right? I think that I'm surprised in the fact that we're not going to a convention. I thought maybe towards the end, as Donna said, we did see an endorsement from President Trump come in, but it really came in pretty late. So I'm not terribly surprised. I am a little bit surprised that both gentlemen went over the 35% threshold. It does speak to the fact that the party itself, the Republican Party, seems to be splitting in a couple of different directions, something we've talked about here previously when we look at Iowa politics. Really, when we look at the impact that the federal politics and some of the maybe negative coattails which President Trump has associated with him, how that maybe impacted Randy Feenstra, that's a question as well. So surprised, not as surprised as I would have been, 2 months ago, but nonetheless, it does raise a lot of questions for us as political scientists and certainly for the voters, as well as those who observe Iowa politics.
Mm-hmm. Kelly, Lane ran explicitly as a MAHA candidate, Make America Healthy Again, the movement associated with RFK Jr., our Health and Human Services Secretary. Talked about pesticides, water quality, Iowa's cancer rates. We talk about that a lot on this program here. He was endorsed by MAHA Action, I think their first ever state-level endorsement. What does it mean that this message found an audience in Iowa Republican primary voters? Do you think that's significant?
Yeah, I think it's significant. It speaks well to the fact that Mr. Lane paid attention to these issues that have been not as well handled by the Republican caucus down in Des Moines. I think it speaks to some of the concerns that Republicans have tried to make clear to them. Amongst my Republican friends, there was a strong momentum for Lane, and I'm from Warren County, actually, where Adam Steen is from, and so there's a lot of enthusiasm for him there as well. But if you have your ear to the ground and you hear what the Republicans were saying at the grassroots, you did have this understanding that there were concerns that were not being addressed in Des Moines at the state level. And I think to your question then really here, in terms of Zach Lane's ability to address some of those issues. We heard it last night in his speech. We actually heard it, a lot in his campaigns and his ads as well, that some of these MAHA issues, which Mr. Kennedy has made famous here across the United States, some of those MAHA issues really resonate well here because of the fact that, of course, we know we have these various issues in terms of rural health, obesity, water quality, those types of things. So, Trump's endorsement matters usually to politicians. The late elements, which Donna mentioned, coming out on Friday, may have had a significant impact or less of an impact than a Trump endorsement does. But I think the big takeaway here is that Iowa Republicans demonstrated last night that even in this Trump era, if we can call it that, endorsements are influential, but they're not really determinative. And I think that Zach Lane was able to play up on those issues, which Feenstra didn't address much during his time in the U.S. House. And, of course, he did not address to a great degree during the campaign.
We certainly want to get to the Lane-Rob Sand matchup, but to finish up our postmortem on yesterday here, there's a complicated endorsement in Lane's column. Donna, former Congressman Steve King. We remember he lost to Feenstra in a bitter 2020 primary, was stripped of his committee assignments by his own party over racist remarks that he made. Lane won 16 of the 19 counties that King carried in that 2020 primary race. What do you think about this? Is last night part of the story Steve King's revenge?
I think certainly there's probably an element of sour grapes to that, given that Feenstra was able to defeat King in a primary. But also, Lane has kind of a libertarian bent to him in many of his stances that he takes, and that kind of plays a little bit into Steve King's area as well. And so I think probably mostly that's an issue of the personalities there involved with Feenstra and King. But, again, Lane did a much better job, I think, than Feenstra did out on the campaign trail, Feenstra was really quite lackluster, especially given his political experience with not doing town halls, not doing the debates, very rarely appearing with the other four people who were in the primary with him. And so that, I think, at the beginning started out as a way for Feenstra to kind of show that he thought this was an inevitable nomination. And in the end, that turned out to not be the case. And so I think you have a confluence of factors here accumulating that propelled Lane to that nomination.
Kelly, you've been not only a candidate, but also an office holder here in Iowa. Feenstra made that decision to skip candidate forums, debates. Did that cost him the race, in your opinion?
I don't think it cost him the race. You know, we've talked before, Ben, that's a tactic that leaders oftentimes will engage in, leaders in a primary race like this. There's usually more for them to lose than they can gain in terms of engaging in this. However, I will say that his complete avoidance of a lot of the big forums that were put on in Des Moines, or certainly around the state of Iowa as well, probably didn't bode well. And I really think, honestly, having run a few campaigns and won a few campaigns as well, certainly at a much lower level, but I think that did begin to wear heavily on his opponents, and his opponents could have been a little more aggressive, I think, on that point. They kind of hem-hawed around it a little bit, but you know, I think if I were one of those four gentlemen on stage trying to get the nomination and wrestling it away from the presumptive winner in terms of Feenstra, that I would have been a little more aggressive there. I think really what we need to ask is whether or not last night was a rejection of Randy Feenstra himself, or maybe a rejection of his politics. And Lane certainly was able to kind of create a lane for him, no pun intended, a lane for himself there.
All right. We'll be back after a short break. And, of course, the fireworks have already started between Lane and Sand. We'll hear a bit of that when we return as we pivot now to the November election, the gubernatorial election. Of course, we'll talk about the open U.S. Senate seat as well. Join us, 1-866-780-9100 with Donna Hoffman, Kelly Shaw. More analysis in just a moment. I'm Ben Kiefer. It's River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer. Politics Wednesday edition, the day after the 2026 Iowa primaries, giving us their analysis. Kelly Shaw of Iowa State University, Donna Hoffman of the University of Northern Iowa. And you, if you'd like, 1-866-780-9100. Give us your question, the race you had your eyes on, and what you see in the next 5 months of campaigning up until the general election for these midterm elections. River to River at iowapublicradio.org as well. The biggest story, we're finishing up our analysis of that. Zach Lane, 40-year-old farmer, businessman from Belle Plaine, no electoral experience, defeating the Trump-endorsed candidate, Randy Feenstra, Congressman Feenstra, for the gubernatorial nomination. In just a moment, we'll talk about the Senate side, the matchup set there. Ashley Hinson to go against Josh Turek in November. But first, let's finish up with this conversation of the gubernatorial race. Lane facing off against State Auditor Rob Sand. Remember, he's the only Democrat holding statewide office in Iowa. He was uncontested for the Democratic nomination. And let's hear what Zach Lane had to say about his opponent.
Across America, liberals like Rob Sand pretend to be moderates so they can get elected, and they govern like radicals. Rob Sand has promised to veto any culture war bill. And every time I hear him say that, you need to know what he really means. It means he's willing to let boys play in girls' sports. It means he's willing to allow late-term abortions. And he won't do a thing to stop illegal immigration. Rob Sand is not a moderate. He's a liberal career politician pretending to be someone he's not.
Okay, let's hear State Auditor Rob Sand reacting to Lane's victory in a video he shared on social media.
To the majority of GOP primary voters who voted for someone other than Zach Lane, I agree with you. His lies about his past and the fact that he still more or less lives in Kansas means that he's not the best choice in this race. He claims to be an outsider, but he has spent his whole career working for politicians and dark money groups. He claims he's going to take on big polluters, but he did the political bidding of nitrate polluters who are squeezing every penny out of Iowa farmers for a decade. He says he's going to be Iowa first, but records show he spends more time in Kansas than he does here. And he admits he'd have to fully move here from Kansas if he gets elected. The phrase was, "If I get elected, I'll spend as much time as humanly possible in Iowa." Most of us just live here. He says he's focused on kids and culture, but he's invested in products that I wouldn't want to talk about in front of my kids. And then he lied about at what point he got uninvested too. If he's going to say all of those things, who knows what he's going to say or what you can believe when it comes to this campaign for the next 5 months.
Okay, Rob Sand, state auditor, reacting to the Zach Lane victory. Rob Sand spent the primary running essentially unopposed, raising money, watching Republicans split their votes 5 ways. Now he faces Lane. How do you see this race, Donna?
I think it'll be a very active campaign that we have going through to November. There'll be lots of money spent here. I think lots of charges going back and forth that might, in fact, be kind of nasty. It is a race that is winnable by both parties, and the stakes are incredibly high. And Iowans watching their televisions may want to turn those televisions off because of the ads that are likely to proliferate. Neither of these candidates should have any problem raising money, and both of them have given money to themselves. And so it'll be very active, I think is the best way to put it.
Yeah. And your thoughts, Kelly?
Well, I would concur with what Donna just said. You know, we see Zach Lane, who had a little bit of money left over. I think, according to reports, he has about $500,000 on hand at the time the last reports were made on May 14th. So we compare that to the amount of money that Rob Sand has in his coffers, about $18 million on hand. And while Donna just mentioned that both gentlemen will have no problem raising money, it is certainly a catch-up game for Lane, who, of course, was pretty well battled during the primary season that ended last night. So I think, as Donna said, we'll see a lot of competition, a lot of arrows being slung. We've already seen that. You know, it's a bit disingenuous for Zach Lane to come out and make criticisms about Rob Sand and the amount of money that his family, and particularly his wife's family, has given to him. It's kind of hypocritical as well when Zach Lane talked about, moneyed interest, given his ties to Americans for Prosperity and the Koch brothers and his wife's past relationship with one of the Koch brothers' sons. So, there's a lot of dirt certainly that we could sling at one another, or that both campaigns could sling at one another. I think that speaks well to what Don just mentioned, is that the gloves are off now in June, and they'll be off even more so in November.
Okay. Iowa hasn't elected a Democratic governor since 2006. Donna, what would it actually take for Rob Sand to win in November? And here, the question for both of you, does last night's result, the surprise victory by Lane, make a Rob Sand victory more or less plausible? Donna, you first.
I don't know that it changes the calculation in terms of who can win this race all that much. I think Sand himself probably would have preferred to run against Veenstra. Lane is a little bit of an unknown entity, I think, in some regards. But again, as he was talking about in that clip that he posted, there's some things there that are likely to come out and be hot topics. But again, once we start the general election, we don't really wipe the slate clean, but the campaigns adjust to now who their one opponent is. And so this was seen as a toss-up before the primary. It's still seen as a toss-up after the primary. Sand really has already been running a general election campaign because he didn't have an opponent. And he's already been positioning himself in such a way that a Democrat needs to in the state currently, with the way that voter registration is. He's got to appeal to those no-party voters, especially those no-party voters who only sporadically vote. Turnout in the primary yesterday for the Senate races, if we take those numbers, it was about 19%, which isn't great at one level, but is better than it was in the previous 2 midterms. And so Sand needs to get both, and I should mention here, both Republicans and Democrats participated relatively highly, given the history here, in last night's primary. And that was not true of the previous 2, where Republicans had an advantage, Democrats had an advantage. Sand is going to need to both get Democrats to come out, but also appeal to maybe some of those disaffected GOP voters. And you heard him say that in that clip. That's a little more difficult. But he wants to activate those no-party voters who sometimes participate, who sometimes don't participate. And he has an advantage there in the sense that we know a midterm election, the president's party tends to do poorly kind of writ large. And so he's going to really try to hammer on those issues that might get affordability issues, for example, that might get those no-party voters out voting in November.
Yeah. And you, Kelly, does Rob Sand have an easier chore with Zach Lane than he would have had with Randy Feenstra?
I don't think it's probably easier, Ben. I think, we saw the numbers prior to yesterday, saw the numbers that Sand was leading over Feenstra in all the polls we saw at various degrees. But no, I don't think it's any easier. And by the time, the dust settles from this and the vote is confirmed next week, I think that, the Lane camp and the Sand camp will know their opponents there. So, again, a lot of money coming into here. I think one of the interesting questions really here is that we got a couple different dynamics in the sense that Mr. Sand does have a statewide constituency. As we've talked about, he is the only Democrat that holds an executive office here in the state of Iowa. So he does have that statewide recognition. The other thing that I might mention is that former colleague of mine, Dennis Goldford, last night on KCCI mentioned that, 63% of the Republicans didn't vote for Lane last night. And it's clear that there is a division between the Maha and the MAGA folks and how that division plays out. And to Donna's point, whether or not there are some conservative Republicans or traditional Republicans who hear what Rob Sand is saying, the fact that Rob Sand, supports the Second Amendment, some of the things he's come out to address maybe those moderate Republican voters, but, the plurality of voters who are registered in the state of Iowa are non-parties. And so we know that non-party voters tend to lean a little bit right here in Iowa, but given some of those things we've talked about previously and some of those things which Donna mentioned in terms of the economy, there are certainly some open doors there for Mr. Sand to walk through if he's able to exploit those and stay on message.
Analysis this hour from Kelly Shaw of Iowa State University, Donna Hoffman of the University of Northern Iowa, and you, if you'd like to ask a question of Donna or Kelly, 1-866-780-9100, river to river at iowapublicradio.org. Laura's been waiting on the line from Des Moines. Hi, Laura. You wanted to weigh in on this question I just asked Kelly and Donna, didn't you?
Yes, thank you. And I agree with Donna. I watched, I didn't really know much about Zach Lane, and I watched him on this Tucker Carlson interview, and I thought, oh boy, this guy is going to be a harder opponent than Feenstra. He's really speaking to a lot of issues that, as someone mentioned, the Maha Republican types really like, and I do too, which is addressing our water issues. I voted for Rob. I think Rob's got a great chance. He's got so much more, experience and incumbency, elected state position advantages. But I do think Lane's going to be, I think with Feenstra, it was kind of like a no-brainer who would probably win. What I think is interesting is with the endorsement of Trump, but also Branstad endorsed Feenstra, which I thought was not very perceptive of him. He is usually better at reading the electorate here in Iowa, and he just got it wrong this time.
Laura in Des Moines, thank you for your view. 1-866-780-9100. Steve in Des Moines on that point. He says he doesn't see Lane's platform as Republican. Clean water, fighting big ag, classically Democrat, Steve in Des Moines says there. Let's move on. There's plenty of other analysis to be done here, especially because we have the state representative Josh Turek winning the Democratic primary for U.S. Senate, a seat Democrats are hoping to flip in November. Turek arguing that he is battle-tested after winning his Iowa House seat in the Western Iowa district that Trump also carried in 2024. Let's hear some victory words from Josh Turek yesterday.
I won that first race by just 6 votes. So never doubt that your vote matters. It does, and it can be all of the difference. I won that race because there's more that unites us than divided us. They trusted I knew what they were going through because I had lived it myself. I've had to fight my whole life. And this is what is needed in D.C. People who have gone through real struggle, who know what it's like to not have enough, who know what a gallon of gas costs, who have had to put groceries on a credit card. We have enough millionaires in D.C. looking out for billionaires. We need real people in Washington who have felt the consequences of a broken system, because when you have gone through real struggle, you will have a different level of empathy and a different level of fight. And this is what we need in D.C., fighters for the people, and that is what I will be in the United States Senate.
Josh Turek beating Zach Wahls, the more progressive candidate, the one with the bigger national profile. Elizabeth Warren's endorsement, Zach Wahls had as well. Labor unions behind him, a dozen, I think more than a dozen labor unions. Turek ran as a pragmatist who could win conservative-leaning voters. Iowa Democrats chose, I guess, electability over ideology. Is that the way you see it, Kelly?
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to see it. You know, Josh has experience in the Iowa legislature, as you mentioned as well. He has experience winning those districts in western Iowa that tend to lean a little bit to the right, although they're fairly purple districts where he's from. And so, yeah, I think that's fair to say that he ran as this prairie populist. I can almost see Reagan with T-shirts now, can't you, Ben? That he ran with this idea that healthcare, wages, some of those things we've talked about that are really impacting on not only rural Iowa, but all Iowans and all Midwesterners and heck, everybody else, that these issues of affordability, healthcare, wages, stagnation, those types of things, I think that resonates well with those Dems and, again, maybe some moderate Republicans who feel a little bit stung by the MAGA policies, particularly from Donald Trump the last year and a half or so. So we'll see where that comes and how that sells. You know, certainly we remain a red state, and Josh Turek's constituency is moving to a statewide constituency as opposed to those around Council Bluffs. But, you know, at the same time, Hinson is a bit constrained. She does have maybe a bit of a burden on her back from that MAGA endorsement from President Trump. And, of course, a lot of people can ask her serious questions in terms of what she's done for the 2nd Congressional District, both in terms of water quality and those issues, which Josh Turek will likely really try to make home and make progress on during the campaign.
Okay. Ashley Hinson, Representative Hinson, endorsed by Trump and Republican leaders, prevailed over former State Senator Jim Carlin to secure the GOP's nomination for Senate. Let's hear a little bit from Representative Hinson.
So Iowa has been blessed with some of the strongest leaders in our country, and to have earned their support through this campaign has been an honor, and really it's some extra fuel for the fire. So first I want to start with Governor Reynolds. Governor, you have my word. I will never stop fighting to make Washington, D.C. run more like the great state of Iowa. I think we can all look at what's happening in Washington and know that they would be well served to take some leadership notes from our great governor, right? So thank you so much, Kim, for your legacy of service to our great state. Senator Grassley, it has been a privilege to call you my friend, and I look forward to serving alongside you in the United States Senate. And finally, to my fabulous friend, Senator Ernst. She is leaving behind some pretty big combat boots to fill. But like I've told her and Iowans across the state, she has spent the last 12 years sending Washington's fattest hogs running for the hills. And when I pick up this baton in November, you all have my word The squealing's not going to stop. It's only going to get louder.
Representative Hinson yesterday. Going to take a short break and get more analysis from Donna Hoffman and Kelly Shaw in just a moment. I want to ask when we come back, how does Hinson's general election campaign take shape against Josh Turek, a candidate whose personal story, Paralympic gold medalist, spina bifida, prairie populist. This is a genuinely compelling human story that Josh Turek has there, and I want to ask what they think this campaign will look like when we return. It's River to River from IPR News. It's a post-primary politics day edition of River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer. Kind of fun to say that. I tripped over it, though. I thought it was going to be fun. It's a Politics Wednesday edition with Donna Hoffman, Kelly Shaw of ISU, Donna of the UNI, Ben Kiefer here as we pick apart what happened yesterday in Iowa's primary. We're looking at the open Senate seat race now. Matchups are set. Ashley Hinson, three-term Congresswoman, Trump's preferred candidate, easily defeating former State Senator Jim Carlin. She'll face Democrat Josh Turek in November, the state representative and four-time Paralympic gold medalist who beat State Senator Zach Walz in yesterday's Democratic primary. Iowa hasn't elected a Democrat to the U.S. Senate since Tom Harkin won his final term in 2008. Back to the question that I asked before the break to have you weigh in on. Donna, you first. How does Hinson's general election campaign take shape against a candidate, Josh Turek, whose personal story is genuinely compelling? This is not, you can't pull out any sort of, if I'm thinking here, any sort of cookie cutter opposition to Josh Turek, can you?
I think it's a difficult campaign that she has, but she can lean on her experience. Her personal story is not the same, but she does have that experience both in the State House as well as now in Congress. So she knows the institution. She has given her full-throated support of President Trump, and I think she has leaned into that already. I think she'll continue to lean into that, whereas the personal story of Turek is very compelling. And it's not just that he has a good personal story, but he also uses that story to inform his policy stances, being a prairie populist, as he calls himself in that regard, focusing on healthcare issues in particular. And so you'll have a campaign, I think, that Hinson will be stressing her experience in D.C., her support of Trump. Turek will be stressing his relatability to everyday Iowans and the way that informs policy.
Mm-hmm. Kelly, put yourself in the shoes of each campaign here.
Yeah, well, I think, that Turek really should focus on healthcare, something Donna just mentioned. That's something that resonates well, particularly with Democrats, but also we see continuing to resonate pretty well here, in particularly in rural Iowa, as we see some of the spending cuts from the federal level, also from state policy, which has really diminished the mental health capacities here in the state, really diminished rural health as well there. So Turek has already emphasized health care, Medicaid, and rural hospitals. That's certainly something that probably Ashley Hinson wants to avoid, given her close ties to the big, beautiful bill and, of course, the MAGA side of that equation. On the other side, and kind of playing on what Donna said, Ashley Hinson is well known in eastern Iowa. There are big voting areas in eastern Iowa, including Cedar Rapids, where she formerly worked, that she has done quite well in terms of winning suburban areas, which has been a weakness certainly for some Republicans there. I don't think that Hinson, attacks Turek what he's done previously in the Iowa legislature. As mentioned, he does have a very compelling voice. If I were an advisor to Ashley Hinson, and thank goodness I'm not, but if I were, I think I would try to tie Turek maybe to the National Democratic Party, which remains really unpopular here in the state of Iowa, particularly some of those issues over immigrations and taxation and the cultural issues, which we thought had kind of diminished a little bit nationwide. Certainly they continue to play here in the Iowa legislature, but some of those cultural issues where Republicans still feel threatened, if you will, by some of the more progressive elements that are going on nationwide in terms of civil rights and some of those social movements. So I think that's probably where I would think Henson's going to go, avoid the healthcare discussion, but really play up some of those national issues where they might weigh down a person such as Josh Turk running for a U.S. Senate seat to represent Iowa.
Mm-hmm. Larry, one of our listeners, asked this question, and Donna, I'll put it to you here. Would it be possible for your political scientists to comment on the importance of charisma, personal warmth, and inspiration among candidates in elections? My impression, he writes, is that this factor and these factors are too often ignored in the outcomes. What do you think about that? Separate from policy, just how much do you like the guy? Wasn't it George W. Bush? Like, he's the guy I want to have a beer with.
Right. And, charisma is a thing. One of the reasons why I think you don't hear political scientists talk about it more is because it's very hard to quantify, right? We can't go, oh, that person, we can internally, right, go, oh, that person has it and that person doesn't, but try to, quantify that, which is what political scientists want to do, and study it in that way is much more difficult. And so sometimes we talk about the notion of relatability, and I think I even mentioned that word with Turek earlier, in the sense that he talks about, I'm an Iowan like you, and this gets at that charisma kind of thing that many candidates want to do. I mean, no candidate wants to say, send me off to Washington and I'm going to stay there type thing in this environment in particular. And so charisma is one of those things that it's kind of, when you see it, it is certainly a big factor. And it can filter down into campaign style. Turek has mentioned, multiple times his previous campaigns where he's a hard worker, right? He drags his wheelchair up the stairs to meet voters. Yeah. And that's an element of that, too. And so it's not just the charisma that you see, but then how do those candidates use their personal story, their background, their charisma to relate to voters? And charisma can be different things, right? I don't think that we would say George W. Bush, to use your example, right, was all that charismatic. He was a little bit bumbling, but that was kind of
he wasn't intimidating.
That was kind of an endearing quality about him, right? Against the more effete John Kerry. Right. And so he wanted to, again, stress that I'm an everyday person. Now, of course, George W. Bush wasn't an everyday person. His grandfather was a senator. His father was a president. But it's how do you play on those strengths that you have with the electorate? And there's an element of skill to that, too, that, again, relates into this charisma because you've got to kind of see, how do I relate to people? How do I talk to people? How do I convince people who might even be predisposed to not like me because I'm a Democrat or a Republican, but yet still talk to them in a way that says, look, I'm one of you. And that's what voters want, right? You want somebody who's one of us. In
right. And top of that list, at least if you're a Trump supporter, and I've spoken with many Trump supporters, you both have as well, and they will say, that guy has charisma, whatever you think of his policies. Now, people who do not like Trump are shuddering at those words. They can't understand that at all. But where do you land on as a person who's been elected to office, campaigned for office, Kelly, you've got loads of charisma and personal warmth. We can tell that on the radio right now. But is that something as a candidate that you work on, or you just have, or you don't have?
Well, that's a great question. I think a lot of it has to do with just the way you are, how approachable really you are to the public, how much you care, particularly for the constituents, and again, how you couch yourself to the potential voters and to your constituents and the people you represent. To Donna's point, there's a deep literature here in political science that talks about the ability for House members in their districts. Richard Fenno, if we go back to the 1970s, not to bore y'all with the research, but there is a lot here in terms of charisma and the ability for politicians to convert that, not only in terms of reelection, but also to get things done, get deals made, get into the cloakrooms and strike, relationships with persons there. So as Donna said, the difficulty, of course, is measuring that. And our discipline has really moved towards a quantification. And so it's hard to say, yeah, that guy's got charisma and that's why I'm voting for him. But we can really look back at persons in terms of Obama, in terms of Bush, as you mentioned, and others, and say there's something about him. Even President Johnson, who wasn't really a nice man, had a certain amount of charisma about him to be able to convince, even divisions within his own party to come along with him in the Voter Rights Act and Civil Rights Act and those types of things as well. So there's certainly something there. I don't know that you can learn it. A lot of it's thought up on the front porch after you ring the doorbell and you think, what is it I'm gonna say to these folks? But being honest, particularly here in flyover country, being honest and expressing your interest in what they are suffering through or what bothers them on a day-to-day basis, I think just comes from a sense of compassion and interest that most politicians, whether we like them or not, get into to address those types of issues and try to help people out.
Mm-hmm. Before the hour ends in 5 or 6 minutes, we want to get to as many callers who've been waiting here. I'll ask our callers to be concise in their comment or question. Suzanne is with us from Grinnell. Hi, Suzanne. Thanks for waiting. What's your question or comment?
Oh, hi. Yes, it actually kind of goes with this because I was a Walz supporter, but I had lots of people who were close to me who were Turek supporters, and my observation was that they had actually met him, or they just felt like he was honest. They could trust him. They believed his story. They liked the fact that he had grown up poor. I mean, not that they liked it, but right, that they felt like they could trust that he would be able to understand people who had not a lot of means, and they saw Walz as a millionaire, and they didn't trust him. And so I think that was really part of their decision, even though I didn't think that from what I knew, it didn't have to do with his being a moderate. These people are not moderates. And that was what was so sort of startling to me, because we share sort of more to the left positions, but they still wanted Turek.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Suzanne and Grinnell. Let's move to Floyd in Ottumwa. Floyd, welcome to the program.
Yeah, Ben, Donna, I'd like to get you on this. Donna, you know that Josh Turek, he's a son of a veteran. He understands veterans' issues. And something I want to get down to this. You put your trust in some of these guys, and you love them, and you help them get through, and they do something like Fetterman did in Pennsylvania. Gets in there and turns on you. But this Josh Turek, if this guy stays true, he'll remember guys that was on the USS Liberty, 8 June 1967. There's a guy right down the road here still alive from that. Stratford, Missouri. He was a staff sergeant, U.S. Marine Corps. That was no accident, my friend. Donna, let me hear your thoughts on that. Josh Turek, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Floyd in Ottumwa. Donna, I think he's reaching out for you there.
Yeah, no, I think that, we know that Josh Turek was backed by Vote Vets. That was a significant element of his ability to boost his name recognition. And Vote Vets doesn't usually support someone who's not a veteran, but his father was. And for many voters, right, they want to see some quality. Maybe it's honesty, right? Maybe it's an ability to work with the other side. You fill in the blank there. Voters have different things that they'll privilege in terms of what they want to see in a candidate. But in the abstract, most voters will in fact say, oh, we want someone who's honest, who says what they mean, who does what they say. And that's a quality again. Again, we can go back to that question about charisma in this sense. Whereas somebody who's a typical politician, I might put that in scare quotes, right, might be seen as somebody who talks out of both sides of their mouth, has to deal with telling voters what they want to hear, and doesn't talk straight in that sense. And so voters, filter all of these contacts that they have with candidates through their own lens and see what they want to pick up on in terms of what kind of characteristic they privilege. Honesty is one for many.
Mm-hmm. Before our hour ends, I want to talk briefly about two other. We have several competitive races in our congressional delegation now. Christina Bohannon and Marionette Miller Meeks for the third consecutive cycle. 2020, 6 votes separated them. 800 votes after a recount in 2024. Bohannon herself said 33,000 people who voted for Donald Trump also voted for her last time. Let's talk about this matchup briefly. Donna, can you handle that? And then I'm going to hand the second as a heads up to Kelly, the 2nd district, with Hinson not being representing that district anymore. Donna, you first on the first.
Sure, right. So for the 1st district, right, this will be the 3rd matchup between Mariannette Miller Meeks and Christina Bohannon. Now, we should recall that it took Mariannette Miller Meeks 3 times to win that race, herself challenging the incumbent until that was
Loebsack,
open.
yeah.
Right. And Mariannette Miller Meeks in her primary yesterday had a repeat opponent, Dave Posh. Dave Posh got 44% of the vote in that primary in 2024, which signaled a weakness in Mariannette Miller Meeks. He did much less well in this particular round. He only got 28% of the vote. And so Mariannette Miller Meeks has shored up a little bit of some of the questions maybe within her own party that she has had to battle previously. But that will be a barn burner.
Mm-hmm. Hinson's move to the Senate opened up that 2nd district for the first time in years. Joe Mitchell winning the Republican primary. Lindsey James takes the Democratic nomination. How competitive is that 2nd district seat, Kelly? Does an open seat change the math for Democrats?
Yeah, I think the open seat might change just a little bit when we look at how energized the Democrats might be this fall. You know, that we do see some energizing elements into the Democratic Party here. So we have seen some good candidates step forward from the Dems as well, and well-moneyed from Rob Sand on down the line. In reality, though, when we look at the 2nd Congressional District and we look at the distribution of voter registration, we do see that the Republicans have a pretty strong standing there. Traditionally a conservative area of the country, and Donna's probably more familiar with the 2nd than I am, given the fact that she's in Cedar Falls. But at the same time, there are some major Catholic populations in the northeast corner of the state, also along the river as well. Excuse me, which may open the door for Democrats there. I would be skeptical that there's going to be much of a race. Do have an eye certainly on the 1st, which Donna just mentioned. And I think we can look at the 3rd here as well, with a competitive race coming out of a popular legislator out of the city of Ankeny, and Zach Nunn as well there. So a lot of interesting things to watch, certainly, Ben.
Kelly, you're getting froggy, so I'm going to hand it over to Donna. 30 seconds, Donna, before we go. You wanted to comment on the 2nd district
Right. Don't
race.
count the 2nd out. While it's not quite as competitive as 1 and 3, it is still very competitive. And this is a cycle in which we expect Democrats to do well. And if we go back to 2000 in this district, which is basically the Northeast Quadrant, and it's had a little bit different form, it goes Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican. It was held just in 2018 or 19 and 20 by Ashley Finkenauer. So don't count out the Democrats in District 2. It's not quite as competitive as the other two, but still pretty competitive.
Okay, Donna Hoffman, the Chuck and Barbara Grassley Professor of Political Science at the University of Northern Iowa. Kelly Shaw, Teaching Professor of Political Science at Iowa State University, also co-director of their Center for Cyclone Civics. So many notes I have here that were untouched. Hey, we have 5 months to chew this over, don't we, guys?
Indeed.
We do.
Kelly and Donna, thank you so much. And thanks to our listeners for your input this hour. Today's program produced by Caitlin Troutman, technical support from Tony Daner, Sean McLean, and Nev Kelly. I'm Ben Kiefer. Thanks for joining us.